Hello, boys and ghouls. Welcome to episode 145 of Dads from the Crypt. My name is Jason, and for the moment, Jody is with us. Hey, Jody.
At least for the moment. Yeah, we have gremlins in our recording equipment tonight.
Yes, very apropos of tonight's subject. Also apropos is our other guest, our good friend, Al Katz. Welcome.
Nice to be here with you guys to sit in with the dads.
Yes, always good to have you. I didn't want to have you too much on the Crypt stuff, but now that we're out of that zone, we can bring you in, and you can join us whenever you want.
Happy to contribute.
Well, now that we're out of that zone, we're in a different zone, correct?
Yes, we're entering the Twilight Zone, at least for this month, and maybe if we like it, we'll keep there. If people keep listening, we'll do some more. But Al, you have a new sideshow. Why don't you tell us about that?
I just put out a brand new podcast called The Donor, a Modern Horror Story. It is the absolutely true story of a friend of mine from when I was growing up. In the mid-1980s, while he was going through medical school, he was a sperm donor, an anonymous sperm donor. Jump forward 25 years. He had quite forgotten about the fact that he was ever a sperm donor. It was a very transactional form. It was money. Didn't care one way or the other. 25 years later, he was one of the first customers at a company called 23andMe because he was really curious about his health genes. But it didn't occur to him as he sent in his DNA swab that contributing his DNA to a growing DNA database, well, it destroyed his veil of anonymity. And suddenly 7 total strangers found Daddy. The thing is, 6 of those total strangers had no idea that their actual biological father was a sperm donor.
Yeah.
And that is what the story is about. It's a completely true story. It's 7 episodes. It's a limited series. It is a story you've never heard before. What happened with Hal and his 7 donor kids, they're adults. These are 30-year-old people discovering at 30 years old that they're not who they thought they were. It was devastating for some of them, and some of them, they had interesting relationships, and that's really what it's about. It's the incredible impact that this piece of information had on all of their emotions.
Yeah, I can't remember if I told you this, but I have a family member who went through something very similar, where she found out that not only was her father a donor, but she also suddenly has many other siblings, and they're having meetups, and they have group texts and stuff going. So she has like a whole second family.
Oh, that is
it's an interesting thing.
A very big part of the story. They refer to themselves as donor siblings as dibblings. And what Hal discovered, he had a particularly intense relationship with one of his donor daughters.
Mm-hmm.
And she turned on him. And their relationship, there is a thing called genetic sexual attraction.
Oh, no.
The donor community has known about this forever and ever and ever. When you separate them, two people who are genetically related, you separate them in childhood or at birth. And when they meet up again later in adulthood, it is not unusual for there to be a sexual attraction between them because they did not grow up together. There's research that suggests that indeed people who do not grow up together but are genetically related, there's something in growing up together that causes the revulsion at the thought of being sexually involved with each other. There's been a lot of research done on kibbutzes where they discover these people, they grow up, and even though they are in pre-adolescence sexually curious with each other, when they get through adolescence and into adulthood, they never marry. In fact, they don't even fool around with each other because of that strange connection that they formed in childhood. That doesn't happen with a lot of these people. The woman who coined the term genetic sexual attraction, Barbara Gagne, she gave up a child for adoption when she was 16. And she met him 25 years later and instantly fell head over heels in love with him. And she would have been sexually involved with him, but he was not interested in that. But that she coined the term genetic sexual attraction to describe what she described as the most intense feelings, emotional feelings she'd ever had toward another human on the planet.
It sounds like a fascinating story.
It is. It goes
And also
some
horrifying.
well. It really is a modern horror story. There's a monster for sure. There's a monster, and it's figuring out what the monster is. That's the story.
So what's your distribution model for this? Where can people find it? Where can people find all the episodes?
You can find the first episode pretty much anywhere where you go looking for podcasts. But the rest of it, you have to go to thedonorpodcast.com, our website. It's the only place where you can listen to the rest of the podcast. We're trying something different. This is such an interesting story. We think it's so provocative that, like I said, we're going to give away the first episode. You can listen to the individual episodes. Like I said, there are just $3 each, or you buy the package for $15, and you will hear a story, like I said, you've never heard before, for the cost of a glass of wine. 2 visits to Starbucks, for fuck's sake.
Right.
And this is hours of a story that you will not get out of your head anytime soon, and it will introduce you to a world that will blow your mind, because it's happening all around you. The donor conceived community is growing.
Mm-hmm.
And as your friend experienced, it's some of these people, they were only children growing up. In their mind, they were always an only child. And then they go to 23andMe or Ancestry.com and they discover they have a huge family. They have there have been some sperm donors in the past that, in this country, we don't regulate it. And so, there are sperm donors who have donated over 100 times successfully. And it's rather problematic in certain parts of the country that are even less regulated, where, you get a whole batches of people who are actually related to each other and don't even know it. And having relationships with each other too.
So I've listened to the first episode and I can't wait to listen to the rest.
Thedonorpodcast.com, that's the place to go. Just thedonorpodcast.com. Check out the first episode. We think you'll be compelled. Hey, it's a glass of wine.
All right. In other news, we have something. We're doing a little twist on something on our Patreon. As you know, we've been doing a Treehouse of Horror reviews from The Simpsons, and then having some great guests like our friend Whitney and Allison and Zoran, etc., etc. But I have a spooky kid who wanted to be part of it, so my daughter Nora was my podcast co-host on the last episode. We'll probably be doing a few more. She really enjoys it.
Oh, that sounds awesome. I got to check that out.
Our Spooky Kids Invade. And she is really excited for the new Beetlejuice movie. So when the new trailer dropped, I brought her in to do a quick reaction. That's up on our YouTube. So she's a little budding horror YouTuber herself.
Excellent.
Yeah.
She's the next Chelsea Rebecca.
There we go. Exactly. Also, as we talked about, we're entering our Twilight Zone episodes. But again, I'm relatively new to this world, so I wanted to immerse myself in the history of this series. So I talked to a writer who literally wrote a book about the Twilight Zone, is a kind of a historian, and his contacts with many people involved in the series. So we had a great interview, which should be coming out this week. So be looking for that. It'll be audio only, so that'll be in the podcast feed. So if you're one of our YouTubers, you're gonna have to go to our one of our many podcast outlets. So you can go to Spotify, Apple, all the major places our feed should be in. So you can look forward to that. But tonight we are doing our first Twilight Zone review, and it looks like Jody, the Gremlins got to Jody, but tonight we're reviewing a classic episode.
Jody kept insisting it was out there on the wing, and we kept saying, no,
We didn't believe him.
we don't see it, man. What are you talking about?
So as we've been hinting at, we're talking Gremlins, we're talking Shatner, we're doing Nightmare at 20,000 feet. This episode came out October 11th, 1969, and it was actually the third episode in the fifth season. So this is the last season of the Twilight Zone, where they're supposedly ramping things down, they're cutting budgets. You would think they'd be running out of plot lines, but no, they drop a classic episode right in the middle, or right in the middle of the last season. So let me do our plot synopsis, since Jody got taken by the Gremlins and I just lost it, so I'm just going to bring it back up. Okay, so and of course we get our opening narration from Mr. Sterling. I'm just going to read a little bit of that to start us off. Portrait of a frightened man, Mr. Robert Wilson, 37, husband, father, and salesman on sick leave. Mr. Wilson has been discharged from a sanitarium where he spent the last 6 months recovering from a nervous breakdown. The onset of which took place on an evening not dissimilar to this one, on an airliner very much like this one. Mr. Wilson is about to be flown home. The difference being that on that evening, half a year ago, Mr. Wilson's flight was terminated by the onslaught of his mental breakdown. Tonight, he's traveling all the way to his appointed destination, which, contrary to Mr. Wilson's plan, happens to be to the darkest corner of the Twilight Zone. All right, our plot. While traveling home by airplane, Mr. Wilson sees a gremlin on the wing. He tries to alert his wife Julia and the stewardess. Every time someone looks out of the window, the gremlin hides itself. So Robert's claims seem crazy. Robert admits the oddness of the gremlin, avoiding everyone else's eyesight, but not his. His credibility is further undermined by this being his first flight since suffering a nervous breakdown 6 months earlier, which also occurred on an aircraft. Robert realizes that his wife is starting to think he needs to go back to the sanitarium, but his more immediate concern is the gremlin tinkering with the wing under one of the engine cowlings. Let's start with the wiring under one of the engine cowlings. In response to his repeated attempts to raise alarm about the gremlin, the flight engineer comes to evaluate the situation, and the stewardess gives Robert a sedative to stop him from alarming other passengers. Robert pretends to down it with water, but he does not swallow it, and secretly spits it out. He then steals a sleeping police officer's revolver and straps himself in to avoid being blown at the aircraft, and opens the emergency exit door in an attempt to eliminate the gremlin as he shoots it. Once the plane has landed, everyone believes that Robert has gone insane. In a straitjacket, as he is whisked away on the gurney, Robert tells his wife that he is alone in his knowledge of what really happened during the flight. The final scene reveals conspicuous damage to the exterior of one of the aircraft's engines, from which will confirm to people that Robert was right all along. All right, Al, what do you think of this episode? And tell us any history you have with the Twilight Zone, etc.
Other than being a fan, it's one of those ubiquitous things. This is one of those episodes that it's, for me, it's a great episode, but it's a problematic episode because it's a yes, no argument. And the question really, all right, he's either crazy or he's not. He's seeing it or he's not. It's one of these two things. And so the challenge to the writer is to hide a yes no argument the best you possibly can, and take it away from I see it, no I don't. It's Bill Shatner's character. I see the monster, I don't see the monster, but the monster's there, I don't see the monster. How do you keep this going? And I think it ultimately wears a little bit by the time you get to the ending. It's flipped in on itself. The short story can go more places. The episode itself, I find watching it now, I'm not so much watching the story as I'm watching Bill Shatner.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm watching the guy 3 years before he got hired to be Captain Kirk as a young actor. He's not bad in it. It's Shatner light. He doesn't. When he finally got hired on Star Trek, he having some money in his pocket, and I don't know. It seemed to feed some of his worst instincts.
Well, I wonder about playing the same character, for so long, whether, he either gets tired of it or he's just trying to like outdo himself, in those ways.
I've hired a lot of actors, and as I've said on our podcast, I've never hired an actor to act.
Right.
I've always hired actors to be, and that's really, if actors, when you're on the stage, yeah, we need you to act because the guy in the last row needs to see and hear you. So you need to project and you need to act when you're on stage. The camera, you can't do that because the camera will see you acting. We'll have to cut it out. And in the early years of cinema, as the cinematic language was being created, and as the audience was beginning to get hip to the cinematic language, the language got more sophisticated and the audience got more sophisticated. TV, it almost started all over again, that same process. The audience now is extremely hip to the cinematic language because the audience can speak the cinematic language itself with its phone. It can create, anyone can create movies. And so back when I started in the business in the mid 80s, if you try to do a jump cut in something, they'd kill you.
Right.
Because you can't do a jump cut. Now jump cuts are de rigueur. Of course you jump cut because who the fuck has the patience to sit through the rest of the scene? Just jump to the next important bit. But that again is the audience understanding the language and willing to really to speak just the essential bits of it. It's great. Where acting is concerned, and again, this is in Bill Shatner's defense. In the early days, really few actors really understood how to act for the camera. It was still a process. There were actors who were looking at Brando and thinking, well, God, he's acting the shit out of the scene. Shouldn't we all be acting the shit out of the scene? And it was tricky. Guys like Shatner, how shall I put this? A perfectly nice man, but I don't think he's the deepest person on the planet. And I think that's what you get. And so because I don't think he has a whole lot of intellectual depth, I think he acts in place of it. And so what you catch him doing a lot, and as a young actor, I think it's especially when he didn't have any old tricks, he didn't have a character to fall back on that everyone knew. he acts. He acts a lot, and so for my money, the story is a yes no argument. It can work, but you have an actor who is acting, and the question is something happening inside his head? And I don't think he's quite as he wasn't. He's never been a technically skilled actor, really, and he was less technically skilled there. And the technology of TV at that time was not able to help him.
It's interesting.
And so it's a wonderful classic episode, but when you really look at it and you really evaluate it on a moment by moment basis, it's like a Tales from the Crypt story. It's a 5-minute idea stretched into 20 some odd minutes. And it's
no,
like I said, if not for the fact that it's Bill Shatner and you're watching Bill Shatner, have you ever seen the redo version with Adam? What's his name? Adam Scott.
Oh, you mean the one from the movie with the Third Rock from the Sun guy? What's his name? Are we talking two different things? John Lithgow.
We're talking two different things. There's a recent version with Adam Scott is playing the guy, and it's they stretched it to 40 minutes.
Oh gosh. Is that better or?
It's a thin premise, everybody. Is he crazy? Now they updated it so it's not quite so. It's got more updated elements to it. There's some terrorism. But
That's where we go with that.
It's still a very thin premise. Is he crazy? Is he not crazy? Is really the question. And of course, at the end of the Bill Shatner episode, they're taking him out on a stretcher because he's nuts. So,
all right, I'm going to be a counterpoint and more looking at from how I view it now, or even when though I know I've seen this episode a while ago, but even then, I was born 20 plus years after it came out. So I think the level of camp that Shatner usually brings to his performance kind of matches viewing it in more retrospect. That fits more with what's happening. Like I went through many interesting moments watching this because I haven't seen this in a long time. I love, first of all, the Simpsons do a fantastic parody of this, like the Terra, 20 feet or something, whatever it is. Fantastic adaptation. I just want to get that out of the way. But first of all, seeing Shatner as a younger man than I am, probably for the first time, is kind of like mind blowing. Like I had this like moment of like, how can he ever be younger than me? That's never seen as a possibility. But there he is, babyface Shatner. And they say that he's 37. I looked up in real life; he was actually in his earlier 30s, more like 33 or 34. So he's actually even younger than they say he is in the episode. And then there's there's all these other little things, such as the fact that they're smoking on the plane, which to me is like bonkers. And then you have someone with a gun.
Do you not remember were you too young to have airplanes with smoking and non-smoking sections?
Oh, no, yeah, no. I mean, I flew relatively younger, but I remember planes that had the cigarette thing still in the chairs, but they were like welded shut.
It was the strangest thing. Yeah, you could book your seats in the smoking or the non-smoking section, and the smoking section and the non-smoking section were right next to each other. It's like,
what's the point?
You think the smoke is going to go? Oh, we can't go there. That's the non-smoking section. Stupid as fucking
There's
thing.
that, and the fact that you have someone with a gun just like sitting in his holster, like sitting in the middle row that someone can just grab. So again, watching it in retrospect, there's all these moments of either intentional or unintentional hilarity to me. And then again, the monster in this is completely ridiculous looking.
Well, yes. It was, what a strange choice to make it look like that.
Like kind of a gorilla, but with like weird lips, but something about all that camp and in William Shatner's obviously, I'm sure it's unintentionally slightly over the top as he does it. Performance just kind of matches all these things. It just makes it infinitely enjoyable to me. I could, yeah, it maybe runs long, but like I don't know, it kind of. I even now watching and knowing everything about it, I was just like enthralled and having a great time. And I think if they would have actually made like a scary monster, that would have actually made it seem less, a little almost more too serious. Like the fact it's this ridiculous looking thing, it just makes it like, oh, it probably is. If he's more into the fact that he's imagining it,
The creature as it's performing out on the wing, yeah, there's the rain, but if you consider how fast the airplane is supposed to be moving,
right?
Aerodynamics seem to have no impact on this creature whatsoever. It's
Yeah, and in these moments,
you're constantly being taken out of the moment. It's and yet but I do agree with you. It is all right if you put the campy lens on. Oh, it's an absolute delight.
Mm-hmm.
No argument whatsoever.
And then, so two things we haven't talked about. One is that this was written by Richard Matheson, who wrote I Am Legend, The Shrinking Man. He wrote the basis of the movie Stir of Echoes. And he also hilariously wrote part of the script for Jaws 3D, which is really weird to me. But one of the things I talked to the author, who was a good friend of, so the author I interviewed, he's good friends with Richard Matheson before he passed away. And he said that, I asked him, did he have a fear of flying or some paranoia that kind of contributed to this concept of this episode? And he said, no fear of flying or any like gremlins or anything, but he was afraid of the singular person being lost, like kind of trapped between the folds of a society. So the man who knows something, a big dangerous secret that no one else will believe, and he thinks that he can save or, he can make some huge impact, but for whatever reason, the system around him just won't let him do it. That was the concept that he was really, more into over and over again.
I think, again, as a literary concept, it's great. And it works. The short story I have not read, but I'm sure the short story works better if for the sole reason that we will create in our own heads what that thing is out on the wing.
Mm-hmm.
Giving it, having to make a choice as to, well, what does the thing look like? It becomes problematic because it deflates the horror that one would feel, the nightmare at 20,000 feet, because it's not nightmarish really, but it also, it deflates the,
well, everyone's going to have their own idea of the scariest thing they could think of to be sitting out on that wing. So that's a very personal thing when you're reading it that you're going to come up with. And then to actually find something that's going to be there, it's going to be very hard to do it. So it's almost like we're never going to do anything that's going to really be that scary for that many people. So we'll just throw a guy in a monkey suit. Now, what's interesting on top of that, though, is as we're recording, this is the 45th anniversary of when the original Alien came out. And that's an example where, okay, fine, we found something that's going to scare the bejesus out of anybody, and it just hits on such a weird primal level of genius and bizarreness.
Well,
that, okay, we hit on it, and we can exploit that. But even then, you don't show it too much.
Okay, you make a really good point, Jason. Because look, it's not an impossible assignment to create. Okay, but hey, every monster movie has the same obligation.
Mm-hmm.
All right, the moment of truth when you finally got to show the monster. Is the monster going to be adequately monstrous for the purposes of the story? That's always going to be the challenge. Here, where the subject of Bill Shatner and camp is concerned, in 1963 he was an unknown actor. He's not entitled to camp at that point.
Yes.
Camp comes with stardom, and even at the beginning of Star Trek, it wasn't really a successful show the first run.
Right.
It really wasn't, and so even at the end of its run, he was really still a moderately successful actor, TV actor. back in that time, TV was one thing and features were another. He was a somewhat employable TV actor, is what Bill Shatner was. He was unremarkable in most any other way, if not for that part. And the way that show captured its audience, and really, that gave Bill Shatner the luxury, the permission. He got the audience's permission to be Bill Shatner. Strangely,
Yeah,
it worked out great for him. But back in that Twilight Zone episode, he's not entitled to the camp. I think he's just, like I said, I it's hard not to see it in two heads. My critical head goes, dude, stop, relax, really, take something, stop acting. But the other side is look at wow, was Bill Shatner really that young at any point in his life? Right. How the fuck was he ever that young? And wow, look, and it's just the fascination with a guy who we know turned into somebody that he never expected to turn into. We know his history, and he doesn't, as he sits there acting in that piece.
Right.
And so that makes it interesting as an historical. I think I wonder if Bill Shatner's later success had more to do with the episodes becoming a classic.
Yeah. Well, and then the other thing that we haven't brought up yet is this was directed by Richard Donner, who had done quite a few.
I totally forgot that fact. I totally forgot that it was Dick. It was Dick Donner.
So, who obviously went on to be very integral in the development and creation of Tales from the Crypt and directed 3 episodes.
My damn boss.
Exactly. Did this ever come up in conversation?
No. Dick was a lovely man, but he never knew anybody's name. It was always, hey, kid. Yeah, hey, kid. I think that's what he thought my name was. Now, at the time, I was a kid. So in all fairness, or more kid-like, I was in my 20s, late 20s. But Donner was a lovely man to work for. He was the first company I ever bumped into on the Warner Brothers lot where they had dogs. And that was a thing. I think part of Donner's contract was I got to have dogs. I got to have my dogs here. I can't leave my dogs at home. And so that everyone brought to work for Donner. You had a dog, you brought them to the office, and that place was just chock-a-block with dogs. It was the coolest place to go and visit and have meetings at. And so when we did Tales from the Crypt, I took that, and my dog Sophie went into the studio every single day with me. Sophie was a German Shepherd that I got my last year of college, and she traveled with me from New York out to LA. And Sophie was a studio dog, and she sat in on casting and production meetings. And in casting, she was great to have in the room because actors would walk in and it would just diffuse any tension right off the bat. And Sophie was great with people. Mm-hmm. Sophie I'll tell one last Sophie story. She was great with people. The only people she didn't like were children. And in her entire life, she only really was a bit one person, because she only really reacted that way toward one person, and it was a kid. And it was Bob Zemeckis' kid.
Oh, no.
My first season on Crypt, we were at the A1 Glow Pasta Factory, and Sophie, the dog, because Gil and I went out to lunch, a lunch meeting. Sophie was in my office, and apparently Bob's wife at that time and son came to visit our facility there in Culver City, and I guess Sophie had wandered out into the hallway because everyone there knew Sophie, and everyone loved Sophie, and this kid, 6-year-old kid, saw Sophie and wanted to pet the dog. And Sophie backed into my office, backed under my desk, and the kid followed her in and tried to pet her while she's under my desk, growling, and she bit him. And so Gil and I come back from this lunch, And my assistant runs out and says, Sophie bit Bobsy's kid. Sophie bit Bobsy's kid. And I think, oh my God, there's my whole career gone. It's over, man. It's over. But fortunately, Bobsy's wife was cool and the kid was okay. It was mild flesh wound. And Bob was very cool. He understood that the kid had cornered the dog, and so there were no repercussions. But it was because of Donner that Sophie was there, and it was just that was what Donner was like. He was just a affable. He was the first professional stoner I think I knew in this business. Total. And I wish I'd been a stoner then, because, man, I think that would have bonded us way more. I was just a guy who worked for him. But if I'd been a stoner, if I'd been me now then, Donner and I would have had a really good relationship. We would have been stoners together. I know that.
I think we uncovered the secret to this episode's campiness. He was probably just stoned the whole time. Maybe that's where the paranoia came from.
There you go. There you go. It's stoner paranoia.
But one of the things I talked a lot about in the interview I did was asking him a lot of questions about how he saw Twilight Zone influencing Tales from the Crypt, and kind of the lineage of from one to the other, and how they both I think there's a little layer of a higher level of campiness and definitely sleaze being HBO. But the format and the kind of twists and the morality tales, it's kind of like there was no concrete connection between Rod Sterling and EC Comics, as far as no one ever said that he read them or anything, but he had to have been in the ether at the very least. When he was coming up. So it's kind of a snake eating its tail, where EC Comics in some way must have influenced the Twilight Zone, which must have influenced Tales from the Crypt, the TV show.
There was a very similar sensibility. I mean, the socio-political mindset that Bill Gaines represented was not dissimilar to the socio-political mindset that Rod Serling had.
Mm-hmm.
And so, though Bill Gaines came from a place of chaos and comedy, Rod Serling was a dramatist, but really there was really the exact same politics and sense of social, the desire to, in drama, it's called utilitarian drama. I think that's what it's called, where the whole point of drama is to make society better. Playwrights like I've got a mental block now. Oh God, just been doing 8:30 on a Saturday night. All my brain cells are.
Well, one of the things that we talked about, how Sterling wanted to give these social messages and say things to make society look at itself closer, but no one would let him. So that's kind of how he decided to use allegory and aliens. You put it in an alien's mouth, you can say things he couldn't just say, have someone say in the drama or Leave It to Beaver.
Tony, I just read something so interesting today that it's just, wow. The difference between humans and Neanderthals. One of the differences that they think, and I'm not sure how they figured this out, but that Homo sapiens are capable of thinking in metaphors, and Neanderthals did not think in metaphors.
Yeah.
Now, how they know this, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
but this paper that I just read today was so interesting because, yes, it is our ability to think in metaphor, to compare one thing to the other, which is what a metaphor is, and really to use one to instruct the other or to inform the other. And as a way to create, what if we do it this way? Because, right, if you use the metaphor to solve your problem, you might solve problems that you can't solve if you can never get outside that box.
Right.
Well, yeah, it's that thinking in metaphors that to tell a story about one thing in another environment's terms. well, that's sci-fi, isn't it? That's the whole
Yeah.
nature of sci-fi, to tell a
Exactly.
contemporary story in futuristic terms.
Yeah.
It's a metaphor.
That's what a meta is for. Old dad joke. All right. Well, let's wrap up the review section. What do you give this episode 0 to 5? You can do half points.
You know, you have to give it a 5 because it is a classic.
What do you, based on your enjoyment?
Oh, the enjoyment's a 5.
Okay.
But a lot of the enjoyment is because because you can there's a whole actor's history in one performance, and for that it's delicious.
Yeah.
It's not.
I definitely give it the 5.
Yeah, one's criticism isn't about is it good or bad in the greater scheme of good or bad. Is it good or bad in and of itself as the thing that it is? As the thing that it is superb.
Mm-hmm.
You can't take that away from it.
Yeah, I give this a 5 with like an asterisk, as in like, this is high example. Like I put this up there with like Yellow from Tales from the Crypt. Of like it almost transcends what the episodes normally are. It's what above and beyond. Like I can point this out as a classic.
Are you accusing Kirk Douglas of doing what Bill Shatner is doing?
No, I'm not comparing the two in any way other than they're exemplifiers within their medium.
Understood.
Where it's like I wouldn't say Yellow is not just my favorite Tales from the Crypt episode. I think it's one of my all-time favorite TV episodes.
Wow, really? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It has that kind of impact on me personally. Like if you were to make a list of best TV episodes, regardless of genre, time, anything, that's for me is up there.
I'm overwhelmed and touched.
All right. Mondo is not here for Song of the Day, but I thought of one that I think will really enhance our Spotify algorithm. I can't let Shatner go without using one of his covers.
Oh, which one are you doing? Oh, hell. Good. Oh, good God.
It's a man pretty much in space on a rocket, one might say.
Oh, dear Rocket Man.
The Rocket Man.
Oh.
By
chosen.
William Shatner. Classic. All right, Jody's not here for horror news, so we're going to skip down to our Patreon picks. I asked our Patreons what their favorite episodes of the Twilight Zone are, so I want to read some of their responses. Ashton said, The Changing of the Guard, Season 3, Episode 37, may be the least horror-related episode in the series, but had the most emotional impact on me. So that's why I hear a lot of this as I'm talking to people at Twilight Zone. It's not as much about scary or monsters per se, but it's more the emotional impact.
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. I think I think of the episode about the woman who's bandaged, and when we finally see her face, she's absolutely normal. It's the rest of it's that. Yeah. It has stuck in my head from the first time I saw it, but that's what that show was like. It was, the storytelling was so often brilliant and concise and
Did you ever see the SNL parody of that one with Pamela Anderson?
I don't think so.
Where it's the same setup, where there's a woman bandaged, that's Pamela Anderson, and they unveil her, and she looks like Pamela Anderson, and all the other people have the pig mouth or whatever it is. And instead of everyone being repulsed by her, all the men are like, oh wait, she's actually really hot. And the woman, like the nurse pig face one was like, but no, she's hideous. She's not like us at all. And they're like, yeah, but she's hot.
All right.
There's just some good parodies out there. All right. Our friend Alyssa said Time Enough at Last. I think that's the one with the guy who likes to read. And he gets,
Oh, yeah.
I don't want to spoil anyway that one. Yeah.
Yeah. Good, well chosen, good episode.
Yeah,
bravo.
Let's see. Our friend Janet said "Living Doll," which is an excellent episode. That's another one of those creepy doll episodes.
Yeah.
And our friend Whitney said, "I will always love Eye of the Beholder. It's a classic."
I agree with you, Whitney.
All right, that's from our Patreon folks. All right, and then I asked for a call for some questions. Especially, I told people that you were going to be on, especially in our Tales from the Crypt Reddit group and some other places. So I got a couple questions for you.
Go for it.
Someone said, I'd like to know what's the last you've heard about the rights to the show, any potential reboots or re-releases. Also, I wouldn't mind knowing what your top 5 episodes are from the series.
Here's the problem with why there probably will never be a Tales from the Crypt remake. The Crypt Keeper in the EC Comics is an old white guy with stringy hair. The Crypt Keeper that was created, that was in the TV series, was created for the TV series, and it's a separate piece of IP. All right, that's one. The Bill Gaines' estate, his family, and Joel Silver are divorced. Bill Gaines' family hate Joel. They feel like Joel took advantage of Bill, and they would never do anything with Joel Silver ever again. So the problem, what that really means is Tales from the Crypt really is just what those rights are just the rights to the EC Comics. M. Night Shyamalan a couple years ago optioned the comics, but what he didn't realize was that the comics don't come with the Crypt Keeper. It's a separate piece of IP. And without the Crypt Keeper, the comics, they're not worth anywhere near as much. The Tales from the Crypt is a complicated franchise because while it's based on one piece of IP, the piece of IP that people most identify with the franchise is separate and owned by someone else, and these two people don't like each other. And so you can't have Tales from the Crypt and the Crypt Keeper be together.
Yeah.
So that's the Tales from the Crypt problem.
It's like trying to make a soup, but not building salt.
That's not to say, look, you couldn't take the Crypt Keeper and create a bunch of stories that were a lot like Tales from the Crypt stories. That's not hard to create. When we were doing Tales from the Crypt, our one obligation was the episode's titles. All had to be titles from the comics. And we would try to use some of the comic, but those comics were good for, oh my God, 3, 4, 5 minutes of storytelling max. There was not an episode in any of those comics. There really wasn't. You had to create an awful lot that was not in the comics. Excuse me. You could create those stories very easily without the comics. So you could create a show a lot like Tales from the Crypt with the Crypt Keeper. You couldn't call it Tales from the Crypt, but it could be very close to the bone. Then it's just a question of how close to the bone can you get it before they sue you. But that's what one could do. My favorite episodes. All right, I'm a little biased towards some of the ones that I wrote.
Oh, this is totally your biases. What your favorites?
But not all the ones. But some of the ones that I wrote, I frankly hate. They're just awful. What the fuck was I thinking? Oh that's I had a deadline. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, that's the most writer thing you could say.
In terms of the ones that I wrote, Yellow, I think is a really solid piece of work. Death of Some Salesmen.
Mm-hmm.
What's Cooking? Two for the Show, I think, is the one with Two for the Show, that when the Kevin Hooks directed. I like that one a lot. Scott Nimmerfro's episodes. I love a lot of Scott's episodes. What's the one? I'm going to go up on titles now. Give me a second. The Brass Hearses episode.
People Who Live in Brass Hearses.
People Who Live in Brass Hearses is a great episode. Lots and lots of. I love a lot of Scott's episodes. I think my favorite episode of all, however, is Only Skin Deep, Bill Malone's episode with Sherry Rose. I think that is, I think, one of the best things we ever did.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. All right. And then another fan asked, and you've kind of already answered this, but just to give it a final bit, is if there's anything from the EC Comics that you never got to adapt that you wish you could have.
No, the problem was, we had like several hundred, I forget what the number was, like 400 and some odd comics that we had to choose from our show. But the 400 comics, there were like 5 to 7 storylines.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, it was the same storyline. Really, it was just with different salad dressing.
Right.
And of those 5 to 7, really 3 or 4 of them were you could mine a little bit. The rest, I don't know, it just got kind of tired. Our problem was that because we were limited to what we were limited to, I think we ran out of. Though we had 400 and some odd stories to choose from, we really, I think by season 7, I think we had said everything we could possibly say. Scott Nimmerfro wrote some great episodes. I think he was still firing on all cylinders. I wasn't. Mia maxima culpa.
And kind of looping back around, and when I did the interview with the publisher of Oni Comics, who's doing the new EC Comics, he wasn't able to give me too many specific details, but he said that they are developing a new, quote, horror host for the new line, and that we might see some of the old hosts, the Witch, the Vault Keeper, the Crypt Keeper, pop up here and there, but they're going with a new one.
They're creating a new 2-dimensional host.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like I said, does this mean theoretically, with the rights that you have, that there could be a new show with this new host with these new stories you're telling? And he said, well, we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but theoretically, with the rights, yes, they could. So, if people go out, read these comics, like them, speak with your money, and give the feedback online and everything, if that's what you really want, never say never.
If they are successful in what they're doing, who knows what could happen?
Mm-hmm. So I think that's one of the reasons that I am, at least me personally, I'm very excited.
I'm really thrilled to see what it is that they're able to do. I think Gil and I might approach them with something.
By all means, we'd love to see that partnership once again. All right, and a couple more questions from some of our Patreons that we put out.
Go for it.
You'll have to do the more heavy lifting on this one. Is what Twilight Zone episode premise would you want to be living in, or what would you think would be your worst nightmare to be part of? I haven't watched enough to really come up with an answer for this, but I'll let you think on that.
Boy. What premise? God.
Like what world or what Twilight Zone set up?
Well, the one with the woman who's being bandaged when you're the odd creature in a world like that, I think that's stayed in my head. So obviously that must mean something.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny as I think of Rod Serling stories and shows. It's funny. Some part of Night Gallery is more present in my head.
Mm-hmm.
That some of that is the first episode of Night Gallery. The has always stuck in my head. The one with the painting that comes to life.
Mm.
It's funny that answers my question almost. That answers that question almost more than anything on the Twilight Zone. Strangely, I don't know why.
All right, and then I like this question. What's a moment in your life that you felt like you were part of a Twilight Zone episode, or where something was off, or something just kind of happened that you couldn't explain?
Every day working for Joel Silver.
That's an answer. I don't know about Twilight Zone episodes or anything, but I had a very Twilight Zone moment when I'm interviewing this guy about the Twilight Zone. And I like to do background, find out, where you're from, where you grew up and everything. He grew up in Huntington, New York, where I was born. And we talked about it for a minute to determine we were both born at the same hospital, decades apart. But of all the people to talk to, same hospital. And not only that, but the first place that I moved to from Huntington, when I was very young, like I was around a year old, was Washington, D.C. The first place he moved to when he left Huntington, New York, was also Washington, D.C. That just felt weird. I don't know what that says about anything, but that's just one of those weird, where things align in a weird way.
I would also say that making Bordello of Blood was like being in the Twilight Zone every fucking day. But that's a whole podcast unto itself.
One of those weird torture punishment scenarios.
Well, it's because the world is working in a way you think, all right, I know what normal is, and this is not normal, and nothing we do seems to change it from being strange. People just behave strangely when they got near our set.
All right. Well, since we're talking about that whole spiel, do you have anything you want to tease out for the How Not to Make a Movie podcast?
We're dropping an episode Tuesday, a tribute to William Gaines. We talked to, John Kassir and Todd Masters and Mike Vosberg, a guy named Grant. I'm going to go up on his name. Grant Geisman. He's written a couple of coffee table books about EC Comics and Mad Magazine. Grant actually also is a composer, a composer and a musician. He's performed with incredible acts, and among the things that he composed are TV show themes, like the one for 2.5 Men. That's Grant Geisman too. He also had some fascinating insights, having spent some time working with Bill Gaines, and of course Gil has some terrific stories as well. So all of that is in Tuesday's episode. Our tribute and a really interesting group of conversations about how Bill Gaines inspired all of us in so many different ways. And the thing about Bill Gaines is he didn't write, he didn't draw, he collected people. And when people started working for him, they tended to stay working for him. And it's not that he paid great. It's just that he gave the freedom to do what these creative people wanted to do. And everyone felt, because there was no advertising in Mad Magazine, no one was beholden to anybody. There were no standards and practices. Yeah, they knew what their audience was, and they weren't going to really offend their audience, but they didn't need standards and practices to do that. They didn't need shitheads in suits. And so they created this incredibly wonderful creative environment that was great for the artists, and it was entirely subscription driven. The subscribers were everything. And in that way, he created this exquisite world where, it was quite clean in a way, because there was no advertisers.
Nice. I never thought about it that way. But no, I love hearing about leaders or managers that find the right people for a job and get out of their way, let them do it.
Wow. Yeah. Really and truly. And the loyalty to him was remarkable. And we're still talking about the world that he created. And like I said, he didn't write a word. He didn't draw anything. And yet that world represented inside of his head. It absolutely did. We know that was Bill Gaines's. That was everything about that, from Tales from the Crypt to Mad Magazine. This was Bill Gaines's worldview.
All right. Well, I personally am looking forward to that, and I hope everyone else checks it out. So where can people find you and your podcast?
That podcast, the Hell Not to Make a Movie podcast, is hellnottomakeamovie.com. It's unfortunately that was a little bit harder to write down and tap out. The Donor podcast, by contrast, is much easier, and I highly recommend the Donor podcast as well. That's, as we said earlier, that's a story you haven't heard before. Blow your mind.
Yeah. All right, Al. Well, I appreciate you coming on. It's always a pleasure.
Oh, it's always fun to sit in with you, Jason, and try to change the world for the better. If only they'd listen to us, man.
Exactly. All right. Well, I appreciate everyone for listening. I'd appreciate it if you gave us a rating review on iTunes, a rating on Spotify, a like and subscribe on YouTube, and check us out on TikTok at Dads from the Crypt Talk. And with that, we thank you for listening to Dads from the Crypt.
Follow Dads from the Crypt on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or I will follow you to the grave. No, seriously, you really should watch. But be careful what you ask for. You may get it.